Welcome to the Adoption and Foster Care Journey, a podcast to encourage, educate, and equip you to care for children and youth through adoption, foster, and kinship care. Hosted by an adoptive mom with over 22 years of kinship and adoptive parenting experience. She's on this journey with you. Please welcome Sandra Flack.
Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy. That is Proverbs 31, verses 8 and 9. I am your host, Sandra Flack. Welcome to the Adoption and Foster Care Journey, where it is my honor to encourage and equip you for your parenting journey. I, too, am an adoptive parent with over 26 years of lived experience. So I get it. My husband and I have raised we're still raising two are still at home, kids through international adoption, kinship adoption, kids with both trauma histories and prenatal exposure to alcohol. So I'm very familiar with the ups and the downs of this parenting road, and I hope that this podcast will become an invaluable resource for you as you travel along on your journey, parenting your kiddos, caring for kids who are coming into your home. And some of the conversations, or all of the conversations that we have here on the podcast, I like to be something that you will find useful. We talk about all of the things, right? We don't shy away from any of it. And one of the things that we do talk a lot about here is fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And the reason for that is twofold. First of all, I am a parent of two young adult sons who were diagnosed when they were little with fetal alcohol syndrome. And if you're a follower of this podcast, you've been along on this journey with me on, how I've learned and grew and made all the mistakes and got better equipped. And the more I learned, the more I came to realize that prenatal exposure to alcohol and even other drugs is highly prevalent among the population of children in adoptive placements, in foster placements, kinship placements. So it is so relevant to this journey. Only most of us have not been trained in FASD. We don't know a whole lot about it. Most of the kids, a majority of our kids aren't even diagnosed, or they're diagnosed with, the whole alphabet soup of all of the other things, which may be accurate, but probably come under the umbrella of an FASD. So I do talk about FASD a lot on this podcast because you need to know about it, because it's highly likely that kids in your care have been prenatally exposed, and the big behaviors that you're dealing with, and even some of those, littler things that are like, you kind of try to figure out what was that all about? Certainly could be from trauma, because our kids have all experienced some level of loss and trauma, and the symptoms of trauma very similar to the symptoms of prenatal exposure. Only when we have both trauma and prenatal exposure, the symptoms are much more prevalent and more potent is probably not the right word, but it's more intense. Let's just put it that way. So anyway, I'm here to equip you, and I hope that today you will enjoy my guest today. We have with us David Deere. David retired from the University of Arkansas, where he was the director of Partners for Inclusive Communities, a research and training center for developmental disabilities. While in that position, he became aware that fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is one of the most common groups of disabilities, yet largely overlooked. David worked on projects funded by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. One of those projects led to the establishment of Arkansas None for Nine, an affiliate of FASD United, After his retirement, David founded the FASD Special Interest Group at the Association of University Centers on Disabilities. He also co-founded the Specialty Diagnostic Resource Center, the first clinic in Arkansas focused on diagnosing FASDs and supporting individuals with the condition as well as their families. David currently serves as a member of the Affiliate Network Executive Council at FASD United, the national organization on FASD. So please welcome David Deere. Hey, David, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sandra. I'm glad to be with you today. Glad to be able to connect with your podcast audience.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you on the show. I know I did get to meet you. I don't know if you remember, but we met in person, gosh, a couple years ago in Washington, D.C. for the FASD United affiliate conference that we had down there.
Right. I do remember that.
Yeah.
And I remember us talking at that time about your interest in getting a clinic going
yes.
in the area.
Yes, that is one of my big, hairy, audacious goals. One of these days here in upstate New York, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that. But I read your bio. You have got quite, a story. Really, you were at the University of Arkansas when you first learned about fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, and it must have really impacted you because you pretty much have dedicated the rest of your life to, to working on projects and being an advocate. So I'm curious because so many people, it's because they were parenting kids, adopted parents, foster parents, somewhere along the line they're, on this journey, and became aware and learned more, but that was not the case for you. So how did you learn about FASD and why did it impact you so deeply?
Yeah, and actually I had to get my nasty old day job out of the way so I could really work on FASD. While I was still employed, I had a little bit of my funding dedicated to FASD, but it was a very small part of it, and I was not able to be as involved as I wanted to be. I don't know how far back in my story you want to go, but just as a little bit of backstory, uh, my first career was as a Methodist minister.
Oh, wow. I didn't
And
know that.
yes, and I retired a number of years ago after 30 years of service. That was one of the eligibilities for retirement, but had gotten into pastoral counseling and went back to school to get a degree in social work and to really give me the skills I felt like I needed. I'd had some training as a pastoral counselor, but very minimal in seminary. And we had to do internships from day one. And I was assigned to Arkansas's University Center on Developmental Disabilities as an intern. And that really changed a lot for me. Um, I had thought that I would continue as a pastoral counselor, and I did for a number of years part-time. But the work at the university center really took me in a different direction. And after I graduated, I called and see if they had a job, and my mentor there was a wonderful woman, and she created a position for me, really.
Wow.
And was there ever since until my retirement in 2020. But so I was working with a range of disabilities. Autism is a big part of what many of the university centers that include LEND programs, leadership, education, and neurodevelopmental disabilities, which really was the favorite activity that I had at our center. And that was training. In our case, we had 15 health-related professionals, different disciplines that we were training graduate and postgraduate students to work in an interprofessional manner with kids with developmental disabilities. So we dealt with everything from Down syndrome and cerebral palsy to garden variety, intellectual disability, autism. I knew nothing about FASD, was taught nothing about it in my social work program. And learned about it really when I was invited to attend a training in St. Louis. I'm actually in Arkansas. We're the state south of Missouri. And they had a regional training center that was funded by the Centers for Disease Control to train healthcare professionals on FASD. So I went for a 3-day training, began learning about it, and the more I got into it, the more I got drawn in, particularly because I realized that out of all the disabilities we dealt with, this was the one that was being overlooked. It was just getting almost no attention. And fortunately, I had a group here in Arkansas that went for training. Several of the faculty in the LIN program that I was coordinating at that point. And so we began by doing training on FASD. And then after a few years, we started a clinic this was before the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM-5, included an FASD in its category of diagnoses. So there, as a social worker, I didn't have the option of diagnosing an FASD, but we started an assessment clinic where people that suspected a child might have an FASD would come, we would do an evaluation looking at just their developmental progress, the places where they were lagging and places where they were doing well. And we would make recommendations for them on the way to best support their child. But over the years, we trained a lot of the students on this, and we had several that shortly before my retirement became very engaged on the topic. And a group of the students my last year decided they wanted to start a diagnostic clinic. And so we did that here in Arkansas. We didn't have a physician at the clinic. I was a social worker, and we had, over the years, different professions that were involved. We had speech pathology and occupational therapy, psychology, physical therapy, nursing, different ones at different times. But we started a clinic that was focused on diagnosing using the DSM-5 that diagnosed what's called neurobehavioral disorder associated with prenatal alcohol exposure, or NDPAE. So then when I retired, I really had more time to work on things like the clinic and developing more resources here in our state regionally, and also got involved with FASD United and the affiliate network, which is where I met you, Sandra. And that's what I've been doing in retirement. This is the major thing other than my family that I spend my time on, and watching some sports. I'm a big track and field fan, and we have an awesome program at the University of Arkansas where I retired. They've won 52 national championships, so we're proud of that group. But FASD is my real passion because I saw the level of impact, and it's really on par with the impact that having a child with autism has on a family. The difference now that autism has gotten so much attention, unlike when I started, where autism was really not recognized much either, but now everyone's aware of it, and we need to get FASD to the same place because it has a similar level of impact on families, but it's even harder when no one recognizes what they're dealing with. If you have a child with autism, you can say, well, my child has autism, and people have some level of understanding and probably some level of interest in support or being supportive of the family. And many of the families with kids with autism, they have no diagnosis. They're just struggling to try to learn approaches to support them, and getting not much recognition or support from the community. So that's really what has drawn me into this particular area of work.
Yeah, and I'm sure our listeners are nodding their heads because yes, if we suspect our kiddos have an FASD, it is a battle just trying to get them diagnosed. And even if you get a diagnosis, that doesn't necessarily get you much else because it's hard to get services and supports and those resources. So, um,
And
you
that's even part of the difficulty in getting a diagnosis is that a lot of the clinicians say, "Well, why should I diagnose? There's no place to refer them. There's nothing to do for them." I think they misunderstand. There is a lot that can be done for them. We need to open a lot of doors that are closed currently,
Mm.
but even with the current situation and the current resources that are available, like your passage training, I mean, that can be a life changer for a
Yeah,
family to have that knowledge. And they're not qualifying for a single governmental program by getting that, but that may do more for them for any governmental program would ever
yeah.
do. But we also need to open doors for other types of support that do come from uh, schools and from developmental disability services.
Yeah, there's so much need out there for families. And, our family on a similar journey, although we were able to get diagnoses for our boys. And I had shared with you, I think the reason why, they do have the facial features, and they were adopted internationally. So there wasn't a birth mom to stigmatize,
Right.
so and they were 6 and 8, so they were a little bit older. And but yet so many families, struggle with getting a diagnosis, and diagnostic clinics are few and far between. I know families who've crossed state
Yes, they are.
lines, yeah, just to get to
Right.
a clinic.
Yeah, I mentioned that we started a clinic here in Arkansas, and over a 2-year period, I'll test people's knowledge of U.S. geography, but we had families coming from South Dakota, Atlanta, Georgia, uh, Oklahoma, Texas, Missouri. Uh, we had people coming from all over uh, because of that. And a few of them had clinics in their area, but they, like you mentioned, being some of the clinics in there in New York, there's a 2 to 3 year waiting time at a lot of the places. So folks
Yeah.
came to our clinic that was newer and not as overwhelmed. So
Yeah.
it is really difficult all over the country to find a place to get a diagnosis, and it's even more difficult for adults.
Yeah.
And
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
we did started doing more and more adult diagnoses over time, but still primarily focused on children and youth. But
Yeah.
it's a huge need we have in the country, and stigma is a big part of it, and the lack of resources being a barrier for people thinking, well, why should I make a diagnosis? We have to not only create more clinics, but we have to change attitudes and mindset, get away with stigma. That does no
Mhm.
one any good. And
Right.
we're a drinking culture. It's not like that's anything that is all that foreign. And it's not just bad people who consume alcohol. It's just a part of the fabric of our society. And um, and when women don't uh, realize that um, the alcohol can does its most damage before they ever know they're pregnant.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Really, probably in the third week of pregnancy, when the neural cells begin to form, the brain begins first to form. That's the most sensitive time for alcohol exposure, and um, the pregnant people don't even know they're pregnant at that point.
Yeah, and I mean, I one of my kiddos that we came to us as a through a kinship placement, so it was before we adopted our boys, internationally. The She was a relative, and her mom had died of cancer, so she had a career. She was in her 30s when she got pregnant for our daughter, and she didn't think she could get pregnant because of another health condition. She was told she wouldn't be able to
Right.
conceive. So, my guess is she was probably 10, 12 weeks pregnant before she realized what was really going on.
Yeah.
And if she was just drinking, because she was not an alcoholic, not a drug addict, she had a career, you know, and even for years, because our daughter came to us when she was 8 after her mom had died, there were a lot of struggles and challenges, and I would have never, it was never even on my radar to think that anything like that could have been a cause, right? But after adopting our boys and them getting diagnosed, and then I found the book Trying Differently Rather Than Harder by Diane Melvin. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
I read that, and then I got copies for all of my adult kids because we have adult biological kids and adult, kids that were adopted. And I wanted them to understand, their younger siblings that, just got this FAS diagnosis. And my daughter by this time was in her 20s. So she read it and she came back to me and she was like, I think I have this. So she saw it in herself when she was, seeing, and she's never did get a diagnosis, but I'm like, it's possible, and we had a conversation about it. And, even in her 30s now, there are things that I'm like, that's totally, FAS, but she's not
Right.
diagnosed and she's doing well. But really, really struggled through her teens and 20s. And we did not know what we were dealing with. We did not know what was really going on because it looks like, you know, rebellion and disobedience and defiance
Right.
and all of those things. It looks like that. And without
Yes.
understanding what could be really going on, that the brain is just wired differently. We didn't know, and we made a lot of mistakes in parenting her, right? Resorting to those, consequences and disciplines and things like that. So knowing, that it's so prevalent because we know, you and I know, that it's 1 in 20 school age kids in the United States, much higher in the population of kids coming to adoptive and foster placements. So parents and caregivers need to know, and we need, resources and supports. I definitely want to get back to our conversation about the clinic, but before we do, I don't want to forget to ask you about Arkansas None for Nine, because you were part instrumental in starting that program. So could you tell us about that?
I can. And actually, I was involved in getting it started, but I was not part of it when it started.
Okay.
It it really grew out of a federal grant that we had here in Arkansas. Uh, uh, it was a HRSA grant, Health Resources and Services Administration, and the purpose of it was to screen and diagnose, when indicated, kids coming into foster care in Pulaski County, the county in which Little Rock sits. And I was involved with some other people in writing for that. That was actually awarded to our state child welfare system, the Division of Children and Family Services. And one of the requirements of that program was to have a steering committee. And so we pulled together people from different agencies and different groups that would likely be involved with people with an FASD. And over the 4 years of the grant, they met regularly to talk about how they could support people with an FASD. Unfortunately, we were not very successful in getting diagnoses. We had a physician who uh, was the one that saw the kids, and uh, for the project, they even created a new category. It was not a diagnostic category, but um, it was a group they called positive monitor. It was kids that were suspected of having an FASD, but they wouldn't make a diagnosis. And I think we made two diagnoses for the county of around 400,000 people
Mm.
in in during the 3 years that we were screening and diagnosing. It was very frustrating, but and I think a lot of it was the physician was just concerned about stigma and not wanting
Yep.
to stigmatize the moms. But when that project ended, the group said, we can't let go of this. We can't just stop. This is too important. And so they continued meeting. And after several years, they said, we want to become an official group, not just people that are coming together as a coalition that are interested in FASD. But we at that point organized Arkansas None for Nine. And I chose not to be a member of it because I didn't want to spend my time on organizational issues. I wanted to spend my time training and trying to develop resources without the need to work on organizational issues, which are essential if you have a nonprofit. That's something you have to do. But after a couple of years, I relented and became a member of the board and have been since then. I'm currently the treasurer.
Wow.
So I do a lot of I do a lot of those things I didn't want to do before. I'm the one that I file our reports with the Secretary of State and the IRS and all that, as well as paying the bills. We're a very small nonprofit. We have no staff, and but we have a very dedicated group of board members. And the steering committee has now evolved into what we call the work group. And they're the worker bees. They're the ones that do our conferences and that sort of thing. So we probably have about 35 people that are part of that work group. And we have, I think, 11 board members for Arkansas None for Nine.
Wow. So tell us what does Arkansas None for Nine do? Is there programming?
Well, as you might expect with no staff, it's sort of episodic. And Arkansas None for Nine was very supportive in getting our clinic off the ground. But we have done a lot of training. We go to a lot of conferences and health fairs. Every year we go to the special ed conference where the special ed administrators and leaders from all the schools around the state come together, and we're really excited. We have one of the staff members from our Department of Education that's one of our board members and has been really helpful in getting buy-in from schools.
So important.
So we one of the things we did is we were able to get a signage law passed that every place in the state that sells alcohol has to post a sign. I can't remember the exact language that's stipulated, but that consuming alcohol, I think it says, can lead to birth defects.
Wow.
And we try to do a lot of awareness and education. We have an online support group. We started a education / support group for people that went through the clinic. And I'm no longer involved in it, nor is None for Nine, but the clinic that spun off is still doing that. They have monthly sessions where they have a topic and spend about half an hour talking about that topic and then open it up to whatever's on the mind of the people participating.
Nice. So what is there?
Gives you an idea of what we've done. It varies year to year, but that's sort of who we are.
Yeah. Is there a website if our listeners are interested in looking it up?
There is a website, and I'm currently in the process of updating that, but we do have one. If they just put in a search for Arkansas None for Nine, it should pop up.
Wow, it does.
It's actually arkansasnonefor9.org, Arkansas spelled out.
It is up there because I did take a peek at it prior to our conversation because I was curious. I wanted to learn a little bit more. So our listeners can definitely check that out. So I want to get back to the conversation about the clinic because that is, something I'm very, passionate about. So it's the Specialty Diagnostic Resource Center. Is that the name of it?
Well, it was. That no
It
longer
was.
exists.
Oh, okay.
We've had a lot that's happened over the last couple of years. Um, when the uh, Arkansas was very fortunate. My former program, it's Partners for Inclusive Communities. That's the university center that I talked about. That's housed as part of the University of Arkansas, although we're 3 hours off campus, and serve the state of Arkansas. So we had staff all over the state, and for a number of years, probably for 5 years before the pandemic, everyone was working remotely from
Mhm.
home offices. But Elizabeth Cleveland was the former student who really became involved and became a leader and uh, was became the director of the clinic that we started. She left her university and moved to Partners. That's the shorthand we had for the university center, and moved the clinic there. And she was there for about a year and a half, I guess, and has now left and is independent. So there is still the clinic there, although it's not called SDRC anymore. It's just the FASD clinic at Partners.
Okay.
And she has started a new program along with, well, one person from Texas and one from Michigan, and they are doing online assessments.
Really?
And that is called the Fusion Center Network. And you may have to add FASD with a search for that. I was looking for that this morning, and when I put in Fusion Center Network, I was getting all sorts of things about fusion energy and Department of Defense and all that sort of thing. But if you do Fusion Center FASD, it should pull it up. Or if you look for SDRC, it still will pop up and direct you to give you the URL, the website for the Fusion Center Network.
Wow. So I'm
They,
curious, David, if they're just a quick question about that. If they're diagnosing or assessing online, are there specific states that they're allowed to do that for
right
through?
now, they're in 4 states.
They are.
They're looking at expanding that, and there may be several ways they expand. It could be because they can find a clinician in another state that would like to connect with them and be part of it, or it may be that they will get licensed in additional states. It's a matter of uh, permission to practice, really.
Right.
And so currently they're operating in Arkansas, Texas, I think it's Nevada and Wisconsin.
Wow. Well,
But
that's good to know.
they do plan to expand to other states over time. Uh, some of your people may be familiar with either Emily Rusnak, who is the head of the FASD Collaborative. She is one of the people that's part of this team. And then the other one is Angel Gramillion from Dallas. And she's a parent who is involved in their FASD United affiliate in Texas. So that's an option. And if someone lives near one of those states, they could travel to that state, even if, and still do it online if they get set up to do.
Oh,
Um, at least that's my understanding. Now, you have to realize I'm talking about a clinic that I've never been involved in. I've just
right.
had conversations with Elizabeth Cleveland,
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
is the director.
Yeah. It piqued my interest when you said, they were diagnosing online.
Right.
So, and you mentioned before,
And let me also say,
yeah.
Sandra, that we were doing all of our clinics online after the pandemic. And for a number of years, the rules for online medicine were relaxed, and you were able to do telemedicine pretty much across state lines anywhere for a number of years. And so those clinics we did, some of the clinics that we did with people from out of state, they traveled to Arkansas. Some of them were online, but even when they traveled to Arkansas, initially because of COVID, we didn't want to have too many people in the room.
Sure.
So the clinicians would all be online, even if the family was there with Elizabeth.
Gotcha.
So there are a lot of opportunities, a lot of options to do things differently than we've done them. And a lot of people say, well, that's not best practice. And I'll say, my response to that is, yeah, having an interprofessional team there with the family, led by a physician, is best practice. But to me, we can't let, this is one of my sayings that I picked up from other people, we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. That would be the perfect clinic, but it's better to get people diagnosed appropriately than it is to worry about, well, who is not on the team, who is not there. And I know my understanding is Dr. Petrenko's clinic there in Rochester also does not have a physician. They have a nurse practitioner, Lynn Cole, that's a part of it.
Yeah, so tell us, because this was interesting to me because I don't think I even realized that it doesn't have to be a physician who diagnoses. So who can diagnose an FASD?
Well, you get into another debate about who can legitimately use the DSM to
Right.
diagnose. And the one, as I'm sure your listeners are, most or all of them are aware that FASD is a spectrum,
Yep.
as the S stands for. And so it's a collection of diagnoses. FASD itself is not a diagnosis, but it's an umbrella for all the diagnoses. The only one that can be diagnosed by a non-physician, or what sometimes is referred to as a physician extender, would be the NDPAE that I mentioned earlier. That is in the DSM. And so social workers, psychologists, as well as physicians can diagnose using it. Although some people argue that, well, you really need to be, I've read an article, a psychiatrist said, you really need to be a psychiatrist to diagnose. But, 75% of our mental health workforce are social workers.
Mm-hmm.
And
Wow.
so anyone that's able to use the DSM can make that diagnosis. And clearly, social workers, psychologists, and physicians are in that group. And there are others. Elizabeth actually is a speech pathologist. Now, the physician and occupational therapist work under the DSM. They do a lot of mental health work. There's a lot of overlap, maybe a slight difference between a diagnosis of alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disability, or ARND,
Mm-hmm.
and NDPAE, but those are very, very similar. So the kids that don't meet the criteria for a fetal alcohol syndrome diagnosis probably can fall under the NDPAE. The problem there is that it requires confirmation of alcohol exposure.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a number of kids that we saw that were adopted. There was suspicion that mom used, but there was no way to confirm that. And so we would diagnose as actually NDPAE falls under neurodevelopmental disorder. And if it's other specified, that could be NDPAE. If it's unspecified, that could be people that don't meet the criteria. They meet all the criteria other than alcohol exposure. So we don't know what caused the disability, but we would make the diagnosis of neurodevelopmental disorder unspecified, which is a way of getting a diagnosis that can be helpful without having the confirmation of prenatal alcohol exposure. The people listening may not be aware that you don't have to confirm alcohol exposure for fetal alcohol syndrome. The assumption there is that that is so clear that that must be what caused it.
Okay, because of the facial features.
But for everything else, that is a requirement and is the number one stumbling block to making a diagnosis when we're pretty sure that's what it is.
Yeah, that's.
So sometimes we have to be creative and still work within the guidelines and the criteria, but not just tell people, well, I'm sorry, we have this one thing missing. We can't do anything for you. There's still a lot we can do for them. We know they have a neurodevelopmental disability. We may not know what caused it, but it really doesn't matter what caused it. It's if we know what their challenges, their deficits, their struggles are, that's where we support them. And that's where we apply things like the facets model and make adjustments in our parenting style and those sorts of things.
Yeah, so true.
I remember what I lost my thought a minute ago. It was defining the physician extenders. Those are physicians, nurse practitioners, and PAs, physician assistants. And most places, the nurse practitioners and the PAs can diagnose any of the ICD, the International Classification of Disease conditions, the medical conditions, so they could diagnose the full range of FASD and not be limited to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual.
So then if somebody was like me, who has this big dream of opening a clinic one day, I don't have to try to track down a physician to get that started.
Right. Absolutely. And that's the number one stumbling block that people that try to start a clinic, they run into. It's great if you can recruit a physician, but if you can't, then start with what's feasible, what you can do. And it doesn't even have to be the physician extender. It doesn't have to be a nurse practitioner or a PA. It could be a psychologist or a social worker. Anyone who's willing to diagnose, and it would be pretty easy to get them up to speed to diagnose. Depending on their area of practice, they may not. If they've worked in the area of developmental disabilities, it's really just learning about FASD. If they haven't, it's learning about how do you identify delays and measure what extent the delay might be. And so all you have to do is find someone who's willing to do it and get the training they need, and then to go to work. And it's not just a matter of going to a 3-day training and being trained. You can partner with people who will give you ongoing support and consultation for those cases you're not sure about, or if in the Albany area, in your case, if you start a clinic and if they have someone that they're really scratching their head, pulling their hair, not quite sure what to do with this, then you can refer to Dr. Petrenko or Dr. Rahman. And we have done that from the beginning. When we started SDRC, we had a geneticist who has been very involved in FASD over the years, and is one who would diagnose people with conditions other than FAS. And he didn't have the time. He also has one of those 3-4 year wait lists, is part of the medical center here in Arkansas. but he was willing to set aside a half day a week to see people that we referred to him.
Mm.
So he'd come to us first, and the ones we felt like could benefit from having a medical diagnosis, we would refer to him. He had all the testing, all the numbers and everything, and the genetic counselor that is now the clinic coordinator at Partners, the university center. Uh, she was part of it as well. She would be in the clinic with him online. He would be in the Fayetteville area, and she was in Little Rock. And the family would either be in person in Little Rock or they're in Fayetteville. And he could refer people to us, but more often we referred people to him. We also had both a child and adolescent psychologist, one person who does both child and child and adult psychiatry. I'll get it right in a minute.
Mm.
And she also would refer people to us, and we would refer people to her because a lot of the people that would come to us wouldn't have an FASD, but they would have something else. And I tell you, it was wonderful having a genetic counselor as part of our clinic. A lot of times she'd say,
Mm.
yeah, it looks like FASD, but I think we need to rule out. And she would name a genetic condition. And 9 times out of 10 or more than that, they would indeed have that genetic condition when they would go see the geneticist. And that's probably the lion's share of who we referred to. Dr. Schaefer, Brad Schaefer was the geneticist. Um, it'd be to have genetic testing done.
Wow. And how many people have you been able to have gotten diagnosed through your clinic so far? Any idea?
I don't know now. They've stepped it up quite a bit and are seeing quite a few more. Um, Probably over the first 4 years, probably something like 150,
Wow.
I'm guessing. We were initially we were working half day a week, and we would see one family a week. Then we started having more of the testing done when they would come to us, so we didn't have to spend our time administering tests, and we would get the results. And then we were seeing 2 to 3 families a week, and then we moved to 2 days a week. Um, so it varied as the volume that we were seeing. And I would say probably 80% of the people that came received a diagnosis.
Of an
It may have been
FASD.
of
Yeah.
NDPAE in our case.
Yes. Yeah.
There
Wow.
were some that you and I have had this conversation. There were some that were so young that we really couldn't measure delays large enough to make a diagnosis, and we'd have to have them come back. And so those were some of the ones that we didn't diagnose. Others, we felt like they might have autism. There were a number that we felt like had both autism and
Yeah.
FASD. Unfortunately, our entire team was heavily immersed in autism work before FASD. So um, I think that's probably the most common misdiagnosis.
Mm.
The people that came to us who had been previously diagnosed, that was the one we most often saw. But a number of them truly had both. But then
Yeah.
a lot of them we'd say, yeah, this FASD really fits better than autism does. But a lot of them, frankly, would continue working under that autism diagnosis because it opens a lot of doors. They could
Yeah.
get a lot of services they could not with our diagnosis.
Yeah. Are you able to tell us or explain what's the biggest difference between FASD and autism?
Well, just from a layman's perspective, a quick and easy way is uh, what are their friendships like?
Mm.
A lot of people with an FASD make friends very easily and have a lot of trouble keeping the friends.
Yeah.
The kids with autism, a number of them may not be that interested in friendships. Others are, but really struggle with ever making friends.
Mm.
That's kind of a big, just 30,000 foot view difference. A lot of the behaviors look very similar. The dysregulation and what we often call meltdowns can look a lot alike.
I've
There,
heard too. I've heard too that executive function, people with an FASD really struggle with executive function brain tasks, whereas people with autism are, have pretty good executive function.
some of them do, some don't. Some of the ones with autism don't have as good executive function. But yeah, that's the hallmark of FASD is uh, executive dysfunction. And the other big thing we saw was a lot of people diagnosed with ADHD, many of whom didn't really improve much with medication.
Yeah.
And we, anyone that, I would say probably anyone that, well, I won't say anyone, most people that are diagnosed with an FASD would meet the diagnostic criteria for ADHD. There you do get into the source of it and the treatment being a little different. But most people with an FASD really have trouble focusing and attention and all the things that go with ADHD, but have more layered onto it.
Yeah. Both of my boys with FAS also have an ADHD diagnosis.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't know your boys. I'm going to make a bold statement here that may be 100% wrong. My guess is their ADHD really is more FASD than it is ADHD.
Yes. I
But I
would agree
also
with that.
wouldn't discourage you from continuing to operate with the ADHD diagnosis.
Yeah, our younger boy who is 19 also now after, a bunch of more testing, in the past couple of years, he now has a diagnosis of as an intellectual disability because his IQ, is definitely lower than average. So that did open up the door for a whole lot of services and supports for him.
Right.
Because, we know that just because you get the FASD diagnosis, it doesn't necessarily get you much else.
Yeah, with a few exceptions, there are states where that diagnosis opens doors.
Yeah.
In most states, it doesn't, and that's, I think, one of the challenges we have ahead of us is like in Arkansas, disability services, the eligibility is based on diagnostic categories.
Mm-hmm.
And I really want to advocate for taking more of the definition that the Developmental Disabilities Act, the federal legislation, it's based on functional needs rather than a diagnostic category. And that's really what matters anyway. Do we care what something is called? What we really care, and what it's called matters for understanding and treatment and research and all that. But basically, what we're going to do is we're going to treat the symptoms,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's autism or ADHD or FASD. And what really matters is how does that impact their routine, their daily life, their living. And the more disruptive it is, the greater the need for support, and the more supports we, the state, should be providing. So there are some states that are going to a more functional definition of disability that, yeah, unfortunately, in most states that does not open doors, but the disability that is part of the diagnosis may open doors, whether it's a cognitive disability or a behavioral disability or whatever. And that's what we work with our families on, seeing what services they can get based on the disability and level of disability that they have. And that's true for schools. One of our board members is part of our State Department of Education. She says any child with an FASD has the potential to be served under special education.
Mm-hmm.
That is almost never a category that's listed for eligibility,
Right.
but there is the other health impairment, OHI.
Yes.
And most of the kids with an FASD probably fit under OHI. It's just a matter of learning how to advocate and educate.
Yeah. That's what my boys, that's what was on their IEPs at school. Other health
Right.
impaired and ADHD.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So David, for those of us who are interested in one day maybe being instrumental in getting a clinic started in their area, what would be like the first step? What would be the first thing we should do?
Well, there are a couple of ways of answering that. One is, and I know you said you had someone that consulted with you that said, well, the first thing you have to do is get a group of people together, whether you call it a task force or a coalition or a consortium or whatever. And certainly the more advocates you have, the easier it's going to be to make progress on that. But it could be an individual that does it alone. So the first step might be pulling together a group of like-minded, interested, motivated people to try to get this started. The other would be to find a mental health clinician or a physician or physician extender who is willing. And again, they don't have to be ready out of the box to start a clinic. If they need to get some training, there are programs that are going on. There is a HRSA funded program that is at Boston, out of the University of Boston, and Boston Medical, I think, and Proof Alliance, that's one of the FASD affiliates, is part of that as well. They started out doing what they call ECHO groups. That's an acronym that basically it's you have a group of experts who pull together interested people who want training, and the group of experts do some training in each session, but then each person that's part of that ECHO group will present a case, and they'll get consultation from everyone else in the group, including the identified experts. And so they build their expertise over time that way. And so that's one that is specifically funded to focus on FASD. There are other ECHO groups. I know Alaska has had one. So getting involved in that can be a way of getting training. I mentioned the grant that we got from the state to partners, and part of it was to train clinical teams in the state. And in a relatively small state, they have trained 14 teams in different locations so that no one is more than 50 miles from one of the trained teams. And I suspect that if someone wanted to reach out to them, they likely might be willing to, they're not funded to do this, but my guess is they probably could negotiate a fee to do training for a clinical team. So there are places they can get training. So it's identifying, it doesn't have to be more than one clinician who can make a diagnosis. Ideally, they may pull in some other people with them, so you have a multidisciplinary team that's a part of it. But that would be the start. And just talking to people about who do we know that does therapy, is doing mental health, or is doing physical health, either one. who might be willing to work with us on this. And, it could be that and out of these 14 teams, none of them are going in Arkansas, none of them are going to be full-time FASD clinics. The one at the university is not full-time, although they are dedicating a large chunk. I'm not sure how many sessions a week they're doing, but those are the places where people could be referred, and they can bill under, the standard billing codes they use now for assessments and for treatment and that sort of thing. I don't know, does that answer the question, or do you have follow-ups?
Yeah, there's there's a whole lot swimming around, and I know we have to get to some other things, but and just one quick thing, would a diagnostic clinic also provide resources, training for parents and other things?
Well, they wouldn't have to, but they often do.
They do. Yeah. I would want that.
Pardon?
I would want that. Yeah.
That's ideal. If you ask me to structure an ideal clinic, it would have about 6 different professions that are a part of it, and it would be full-time, and it would also have people doing supports and training and all interventions and all of that. I'm not sure where that exists. There may be a couple of places in the country that do, but it would be rare. And so what I would do, instead of shooting for having everything from day one, is what can we do? And let's start with the diagnostic team. And it may be that there is some other place that they refer for those other services of training and support. And I know you do supports there, and there are a lot of really good online support groups. And I don't know if you've had a session with the FASD Collaborative, but I strongly recommend that. They have a number of webinars that have been done that are archived that people can watch. They also have a database with support groups, online support groups that people from anywhere can join up with. They're from all over the US and Canada. So I'm a social worker. If I were going to start an FASD clinic and I didn't have the bandwidth to do all of that, I would have that database of support groups. And is an in-person support group preferable to online? Yeah, probably is. I just think a lot of our interpersonal dynamics don't come across completely over video, but video lets you do things like we're doing today and reach people we would never reach otherwise. The same thing can be true of support groups. So I would, and if you have a clinician that needs help in putting together these supports and they say, well, there's nothing I can do for them, we can give them that database of support groups. We can direct them or even buy copies for them of Diane Malbin's book. And I understand there's just been a new edition of that. Is that correct?
Yes. Brand new edition just out. Yeah.
So there are a lot of resources they can have available if they don't have any bandwidth, capacity, or expertise to provide all those supports. There's a lot we can do for people anywhere in the world, really, that can really make a difference without us doing that. Ideally, it would all be in that one center, and that's what we've talked about trying to build here in Arkansas. That's what we're working toward. And we're doing parts of it. We've had a young adult peer group that has met several summers to just develop life skills and talk about job readiness and how to do a resume and how to apply for jobs and that sort of thing. So it's very limited, but we've done a few things like that. And so it's do what you can when you can.
Sandra Flack, host of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, and FASD educator Debbie Raymond invite you to join Hope for the FASD Journey, a virtual support community for parents and caregivers raising individuals with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, diagnosed or not. This faith-based support community meets online 3 times each month, features special VIP guests, and a private Facebook group for members only, which includes Soul Care Saturday video devotionals led by Sandra and Deb. Both Sandra and Deb are adoptive moms raising kids with FASD and facilitators of the Facets Neurobehavioral Model. For details and to register, visit justicefororphansny.org/hope-community. That's justicefororphansny.org/hope-community.
So much I could pick your brain, I think, for longer, but I wanted to get onto some other things too, because I wanted to make sure that we mentioned FASD United, because you do serve on the Executive Council for the affiliate. So just tell us a little bit about that for any listeners who might not be familiar with FASD United.
Okay. Yeah, FASD United is really the nation's premier advocacy and support group for FASD, and not just for the U.S. They also, one of our affiliates is in, oh gee, I'm blanking out now whether it's Ireland or Scotland. I think it's Scotland.
And Canada, I believe, right?
Yeah, and there might be some in Canada. And I know people from, when we do webinars, it's very common for us to have people from Australia, New Zealand, continental Europe, and certainly Canada. Canada really has a lot of great resources on FASD. On the whole, I would say they're ahead of us in the U.S., but FASD United is sort of where a lot of that happens, and the affiliates are the state or regional connections. The affiliates are autonomous. They're all either part of a governmental agency, a university, or a 501c3. And I think we're up to about 50, maybe 52. I may have heard we've added a couple of new ones in the last couple of months. They're not in every state, but they're in most states now. And you can go to FASD United's website, and there is a map of the U.S., and you can see what is in your area. And if you're in a state or area that is not served, and you're interested in getting a group started, that's something we can work with you on doing, trying to pull together and get a group started. It doesn't take a lot of people. I mean, ideally, you would have a lot of people involved in it, but we actually have some affiliates that are may have been more in the past, but are now one person doing them. And the affiliates do different things. A number of them, I think there are about 8 or so that have clinics. A lot of them do awareness events. A lot of them do education. A lot of them do supports. And a lot of them do training similar to Facets. A lot of them do a program called Families Moving Forward. Mm-hmm. So the affiliates do different things, but we all work together to sort of be the boots on the ground for FASD United. There are some requirements to be an affiliate, but there are not expectations that every affiliate will do this project. There may be requests for us all to do certain things or to disseminate certain information, but it's really up to the affiliate to determine what they will do and how they'll do it. And FASD United from time to time has some financial supports they've been able to give, whether it's to attend the gathering of affiliates that's now called Impact Week, or there have been many grants that they've done over time. But there can also be a lot of peer-to-peer support, affiliate to affiliate, with starting a clinic, or we're wanting to become an affiliate. How do we apply and become a 501c3? So there can be a lot of support in that happening. And there's a lot of just moral support and sharing of ideas and energy across the affiliate network. And I think the thing that has driven the growth, we probably doubled the number of affiliates over the last 3 years. And a lot of that has been because of the FASD Respect Act.
Yes.
A lot of people have gotten involved in advocating for that and become familiar with the affiliate network and have said, hey, how do we become an affiliate? And then there are groups like yours at Justice for Orphans who may not have realized that was an option.
Right.
It may not be FASD only, but FASD is a significant part of what we do. And yes, those organizations are certainly welcome and encouraged to become an affiliate. And we've had a number of groups that are focused on fostering, adoption, kinship care who have become affiliates over the last few years. And as you said, that is such an area where there is so much need for information and support around FASD. There's a lot more than the 1 in 20, which is pretty staggering to think about. Yeah. In most every classroom, on average, in this country, you'd have a child with an FASD. And we know that given the level of substance use that's often involved in child welfare, those numbers are much higher there.
Yeah, definitely. So much great stuff FASD United is doing. I know we'll put a link, of course, in the show notes to how to contact them if our listeners are interested. I know you're retired, David, but
let me mention one thing, if I may, about FASD United I didn't think of, and that's the Family Navigator program.
Oh, yes.
And we really need to mention that one because that's the group of people that are, I think they're all part-time, but there are 3 or 4 people that are designated as navigators. And when someone puts in a request for information, they're the ones that will reach out to that individual. And they have worked really hard to identify the resources that are available in every state in the country. So even if there's not an affiliate, they could tell you, oh, yes, there are these resources you can go to. And not all the resources are identified as an FASD program. One of the things that I'm convinced that the FASD community really needs to tap in more to the larger disability world. There are a lot of supports out there that are not created for FASD, but that people with a diagnosis of FASD would be welcome to be a part of. And these are not just state agencies, they're programs like yours and like our, we have a respite coalition here in Arkansas that's gets a little federal funding that supports it, but basically it's a group of interested individuals that come together saying, how can we increase the option for respite for families of children with a disability? FASD can be one of those disabilities. It's not exclusively focused on that condition, but it's open to people. And I think the more we tap into that, we're going to find more and more resources that are available to families.
Yeah, no, FASD United, incredible organization. I encourage our listeners to go check their website out for sure. And we do talk about them quite a bit here on this podcast as well. You're a busy guy, and I know you're retired, David, and I so appreciate all that you're doing on behalf of the FASD community. As we wrap up, would you, knowing that our listeners are primarily adoptive and foster parents, most likely struggling with, kiddos on the FASD spectrum, would you just offer some words of encouragement or advice to our parents listening?
Yeah, and I just want to say you are serving such a huge function for our society that a lot of times you may be serving the kids that are the some of the most challenging to serve. And we know that uh, in looking at success in the life for the kids that we're talking about here, one of the major factors, we've talked about diagnosis, getting an early diagnosis, predict better success in life. We also know that the number of placements makes a huge difference.
Mm-hmm.
The grant that I had, we mentioned that we had here in Arkansas, trying to diagnose kids in the foster care system, um, the one of their major goals for that project nationally was reducing the number of placements. We know that makes a big difference. So having families that are willing to learn and to struggle, I'd say reach out to one another, find support wherever you can, whether it's through an organized support group or if it's just, it may be the family next door that's understanding and supportive of you. It may be someone across town who's in a similar situation. And when you are having those hard days, you can reach out to one another and get some encouragement and support. Take care of yourselves. Um, I have been a pastoral counselor in the past, and one of the big things I would tell parents is you can only help your family to the extent that you have the psychic energy, the emotion, the all of that to support them. So if you want to take care of them, take care of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't, you're cutting them out on part of you that they really need. And I know that is so hard when you have someone that's demanding 100% of your attention 24/7, but finding a way to carve out whatever it takes to rejuvenate you, taking
Mm-hmm.
some time for yourself and self care, uh, even if it's 5 minutes of getting support from a sympathetic ear, that can really make a difference. But thank you so much for the work you're doing. You're really making a difference in lives and making a huge difference in society, even if we don't often appreciate it and recognize it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, David. I just greatly appreciate, like I said, all that you are doing and have done over the years and just the effect you're having and the impact in the FASD community and, for kind of not really being retired and being on, being a big part of FASD United and the affiliate network. I'm grateful for all that you're doing and just so grateful that you were with us today. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
Well, thank you, Sandra, and thank you for doing the podcast and for having me on it today.
Thanks so much. Well, thank you for listening to the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast. I hope you were inspired and encouraged by my conversation with David Deere today. We just could talk forever, and I'm so excited for everything that he shared and for all that he's done and is doing on behalf of the FASD community. Make sure you check out the show notes for some links that we're going to put in there. And I hope you were just as enthralled as I was, because there's so much that we can learn and ways that we can make a difference on this journey. So thank you so much for staying tuned for that. In addition to encouraging you, of course, on this podcast, we always want to equip you for your parenting journey. You heard about our support group, Hope for the FASD Journey, our online support community. We also, I offer parent coaching, one-on-one parent coaching online, as well as in-person and online training and workshops. You can find out about all of the above at our website, justicefororphansny.org. And we are an affiliate of FASD United, and I am. a mom of 2 young adult sons diagnosed with fetal alcohol syndrome, and spent years really just struggling, trying to figure out what was going on and what was going to work, and became trauma informed and, used all the connected parenting strategies, which work and I fully endorse. But you reach a point to where it's like, we're missing something else is going on, and for us, that's when I found out that, there was a whole lot more to FAS than just the diagnosis, because our boys got diagnosed, but then there was nothing, no resources were offered to us. So we want to make sure that here we are providing you with resources that will help you and help your family. So every month I do a free online intro to FASD workshop, which is perfect for you yourself if you're just starting to learn about this, or maybe you already know all about it, but you're thinking that, the school teacher or the youth group leader or the Sunday school teacher or your older adult, siblings or the grandparents, babysitters, whoever's working with your kids, could they benefit from understanding FASD better? So once a month, I do one of those online. It's free. And then I also offer a variety of different workshops in different lengths from 3 hours to our biggest one. Actually, we have coming up in May 1st, is the first of a series of 6 3-hour workshops. It's our deep dive into FASD using the facets neurobehavioral approach. And you can sign up for that. Again, it's everything's on our website, justicefororphansny.org. I hope that you will check that out. I do a lot of blogging now at sandraflack.com, so you can go there if you'd like to learn a little bit more, and follow my social media as well as Justice for Orphans. We have a Facebook page and an Instagram page, and we have a YouTube channel at Justice for Orphans, where actually all of the video versions of this podcast exist, and some other videos that we've produced as well. So check us out there at Justice for Orphans. You can also find me at Sandra Flack on those social media platforms, because I always love to connect with you. Feel free to email me. My email is also in the show notes. And I'm just grateful that you spent your valuable time with me today. I am thrilled to have you along for the journey.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, brought to you by Justice for Orphans. We hope you were encouraged today. Please be sure to subscribe to this podcast and leave a review, and share it with your fellow foster and adoptive parent friends so they can be encouraged too. Be sure to find and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Justice for Orphans, and check out our website for vital resources at justicefororphansny.org.